decimal. Can you tell me, what does propaganda mean to you? The word propaganda, what is propaganda? Somebody, sir?
Any kind of media that is put out to make you have a strong opinion on a...
Yes, yes. A strong opinion about something, whether right or wrong, correct? That propaganda is something that we use, or we are, that we live with. And hold on one sec, get this going. Okay. So, propaganda is, and I like the first definition of this, is information, ideas, or rumors deliberately spread widely to help or harm a person, group, movement, institution, nation, etc. Propaganda can be a lie. Propaganda is a truth. It's your truth. It's not everybody's truth, but it's your truth, and you're trying to convince others that they should believe that too. Today, the world that you live in, you're inundated with propaganda, from Facebook to QAnon to the news, television, everything. You know, everybody's telling you how you should think, what you should think. And so that is propaganda. QAnon is propaganda. CNN is propaganda. Fox News is propaganda. The newspaper is propaganda. They want you to believe what they believe. But propaganda is not new. Propaganda has been around forever. And it is not something that has just recently become part of our vocabulary. These are going to be different examples historically that have been devices of propaganda from different cultures that I'm going to share with you. And this is not an accurate overview, just samples that I'd like to use to be able to talk about propaganda. I like starting off with the Russian Revolution, Russian constructivism, and during this time, the Russian Revolution, you have to understand that one of the things that made propaganda so effective was that its audience in whom they were dealing with was ignorant. They were illiterate. During this time, people worked and didn't go to school. They worked the farms. They didn't go to school. They worked very hard, and they didn't read. So the use of shapes and colors and invasion of shapes were very important to tell people what was going on in their world. And often during this period, there was a whole series of propaganda paintings that were done on sides of trains. And the reason why they were done on the sides of trains had everything to do with the audience, because most of the constituents were in rural countries on farms. The only thing they'd see to get news would be that train coming by, and they'd be able to see these posters to be able to understand what's going on in their government, or what the resistance is doing, or what they need to know. So trains were a very important part of that. And so to understand the message, you didn't necessarily have to read or understand the language. And the message is always fairly clear in propaganda posters. The use of the diagonal, the use of saturated color palettes, strong shapes. And clearly, for me, what this is saying is that you must work hard and keep your weapon to be prepared. Work and protection is very important. The use of the diagonal, very important with the use of imagery. The use of the diagonal showing a movement, a charge, an intent look, a force of red coming to fight. The idea of unity, all going in one direction, the community following the leader, and all in support of the direction that we are moving in. Two examples here, one Russian, one American. The Russian is, speak up. We are so proud. We want you to know what we're doing. This one's shut up. There are spies everywhere. Do not speak. During this time, there was a lot of paranoia that your neighbor was a card-carrying communist, and that she was part, or he was part of the Communist Party, and they were trying to overthrow the country. So you wanted to be very careful to not trust anybody. So shut up. Germany. Again, the use of the allegiance, of a movement, all going in the same direction. And the idea of the word being empowered, of saying, yes, we can, we are, we will. The idea of exaggeration, of stereotyping ethnicities is very much part of propaganda. Germany, again, the vilification of the Jewish community, exaggerated noses, the gnawing, the color palette of complementary colors, just the acidic quality of the message of the color palette here tells us that these are bad people, that they must be our enemy. In America, we do this thing of exaggeration of the Japanese man, and the sort of the big teeth and the stereotyping of the look, the Chinese, the chopstick font being used, and look who is supporting this idea of hate the Japanese. They are our enemies. Then we want to empower women. During this time, a lot of our American soldiers are male, they're going to war. We don't have people in the factory. During this time, women were primarily focused in the house, taking care of children, taking care of the household. Now what we do is we need them as a workforce. So let's get them out of the house, let's get them into the factories, let's get them welding and sewing and helping in the effort. So we recruit them, we empower them, we give them finally the opportunity that they deserve to have the choice to be part of the workforce. While they're working in the workforce, we have the men over-exaggeration of the whole hero concept of being able to fight, that idea of movement, that idea of intensity, and the glamorization of going to war. My favorite is this one. Do you guys know the work of Norman Rockwell? Norman Rockwell was an illustrator, and in my opinion, my propaganda to you is I will take a position in saying that Norman Rockwell is the sole reason for the tagline, "Make America Great Again." And the reason why I say that is because the time period that Norman Rockwell paints and does all of this work for, he does, and I'll show you in a little bit, magazine covers. He portrays a world of perfection, of calm, of wonder, of a family sitting at a table. Everybody's clean cut, everybody is happy, there's plenty of food, we're getting dressed, everything is just so perfect here. Everything, there is absolutely no problem here at all in this family. There's no problem of incest, there's no discussion of rape, there's no drug abuse, there's no addiction, there's no cancer, there's nothing here, there's just family bonding. This is also a period in our country where we had the largest percentage of middle class, meaning that if you were part of the middle class, you most likely had a job, you had food on the table, you had money in the bank, and you had a vehicle. And so life was good, and this was pretty much the largest middle class we ever had. And it was a good time if you were white. Keep that in mind, because I'm going to address it a little bit. So Norman Rockwell presents this concept of white Americana. Let me keep going. Granddad at the barbershop, apple pie and baseball, mom helping, her son. And this did exist. I mean, this was that part of the world, or our world, that really, it did exist. It was a good time. It was a healthy time. It was, how many times have you heard your grandparents say, well, things aren't like they were in my day. You know, in my day, things were much more innocent. And he was right. To a certain extent, they were, except. So, and I'll go back to Rockwell a little bit. Let's talk about allegiance now. You know, Hitler recruited the young males to be part of the Hitler Youth, or the Jungen. And, you know, they already had men fighting on the front lines. They had women working in the concentration camps and in the military. They recruited children, too, to partake in the Nazi regime. On the other hand, we've got the Boy Scouts, the Cub Scouts, that pledge allegiance. They have, anybody Cub Scout, Boy Scout at any time? No? Really? How come? I was a Cub Scout. Well, I remember being Cub Scouts, we had to make an allegiance, and it was, you know, all good. Are you aware that the Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts don't exist anymore as an organization? Do you know why?
No one reason why.
Sorry?
No one reason why, but it might not.
Oh, there was a reason, yes.
Yeah.
Anybody? Any guesses? No?
Wasn't it a molestation?
Yes, they went bankrupt. They went bankrupt from having to pay lawyers to defend against all these people, males, that sued them for molestation. And so they no longer exist. So it's like this warped concept of allegiance where we think it's supposed to represent, you know, being good citizens, but there's a different story. So Norman Rockwell, again, talks about this innocence of life, this wonderment of life, this enrichment, this fulfillment, if you're white. Let me tell you about what's happening during this time if you're black, okay? If you're black and you happen to decide you're going to take a trip to Troy, Alabama during this time, and you're downtown and you're looking at everything, and it was lawful, you would most likely be pulled over by a cop. And you would be asked for your papers. What are you doing here, sir? You don't live here. Do you have a job? You don't have a job. You don't have a residence? What do you mean you think you want to live here? This is vagrancy. I'm going to arrest you and I'm going to put you in prison, okay? In comes a patron and says, oh, no. These 4 black gentlemen, I'll take care of them. I'll pay their bail. Fellas, don't worry. Come work it off for me. I happen to own a cotton gin, and I'll put you in a house. I'll give you an address. I'll even feed you. Pay you $100 a month, and $95 a month will actually go to the expenses of your food and your housing and the clothing, and the $5 left will have to go towards the you're paying me back for the for your bail. This was called Jim Crow, and this was Jim Crow law, where you were allowed to do this. You were allowed to enslave people of color because they didn't have, and they did this with women too in Phoenix City, where they would entice women to come to Phoenix City. They would be arrested for vagrancy, and then they would have to pay off their debts by becoming prostitutes. That was the part of the other side of the world that Norman Rockwell wasn't painting until this. And I don't know if you know this painting. The young girl's name is Ruby. The painting actually hangs in the White House. And it was very simple, but it was very, very much this world, the Norman Rockwell world, where a young student wants to get an education in a white school, is being thrown at, is being called epithets, and has to be escorted by big, large white men. That's the other side of the Norman Rockwell world. So for me to hear Make America Great Again, I'm thinking, but for whom? As a person of color, as a person that really has a deep desire to learn about oppression of people, it breaks my heart because I think it's one side of the story, okay? Here's some propaganda posters related to venereal disease for the military. Propaganda posters related to world leaders, Lenin, Che Guevara, Chairman Mao, Obama, and Reagan. I'm going to talk about Reagan in a little bit. How am I doing in time? Okay, good. Again, notice the use of the color palette, notice the use of the heart shapes, notice the use of the type of heroic, positioning, looking out to the future for hope, villainization. Why? This is Barbara Kruger, an artist of the 80s. She would do these installations related to topics of that period and do these installations using words, rooms, and imagery. There was, during this time, not just people that were making statements and propaganda, but also something called guerrilla art. And what guerrilla art were these organizations, groups, co-ops of people that were getting together, talking about the issues and doing guerrilla type of art and putting it on the streets. This is a campaign done by a group called the Guerrilla Girls. Now, the Guerrilla Girls was not owned by one person or identified by one person. It was a group of people being the conscience of the art world, and they would identify issues related to, in particular, feminism or women in the art world and the unfair practices that they were going through. And then it was expanded into the arts like Hollywood. And then we go into this, again, 1980s, and this is where we begin to talk about Ronald Reagan. It's really interesting that the early 80s had a great deal to, it's interesting, how do I put this? I moved to New York City in 1980, and I moved to essentially ground zero where AIDS had started, in addition to San Francisco and Chicago, but I was in New York City. And nobody knew about this disease other than it was killing drug abuse, IV users, prostitutes, blacks, and homosexuals. And because it was those constituents over there, a lot of people did not pay attention to it. And those people over there were dying. They were dropping like flies. And what's so interesting for me was, as you were part of Ground Zero COVID, and the attention for me, by comparison to when AIDS and HIV was birthed, and COVID, huge difference, Of course, COVID got a great deal of attention, even if it wasn't necessarily everybody's going to go and get inoculated, but there was like, no, it's made up, it's fake, no, it's real. You got to get inoculated. No, I don't. But everybody's dealing with it. Look at what we're dealing with now. Hey, where's your mask? And so everybody's abiding by the rules. There were no rules with AIDS. With AIDS, it's just like, screw it, let them die. Who cares? Okay? And I say that, and I don't say that lightly, because if you, during the 80s, had AIDS and died, a hospital wouldn't take you, an ambulance wouldn't pick you up, and a funeral home refused to take your body because nobody knew what it was like. So you were just persona non grata. I want to push this a little bit further. AIDS does not exist in the South. In Alabama, there is no AIDS. Do you believe me? You don't. Good. The reason why I say that is because it's like China. AIDS also doesn't exist there, only because we don't talk about it. If you have AIDS, grandmama will say he has the cancer, but not AIDS. You'll have anything else but AIDS because it is a debilitating disease to have. It not only affects you, but it provides shame for the family that they don't want to have to deal with it. They don't want to have to explain to somebody, to the neighbors, how the son, the grandson, or the granddaughter got it. There had to be a number of ways, and either way, all of those are just morally bad. So let's just say she got the cancer. So this organization called Grand Fury there's an organization that's doing this powerhouse propaganda. And they're saying exactly this is their mantra. If you're silent, if you say nothing about AIDS, you will die. It's the same concept of Nazi Germany. When I think it was Elie Wiesel that said, or no, it wasn't Elie Wiesel, it was somebody else that said, first they came for the gypsies and I said nothing. Then they came for the Jews and I said nothing. And then they came for me. End. Okay? So if you say nothing, people will die. And people did die because people were not saying anything. So they came out with these very graphic posters, propaganda posters, addressing the community that were susceptible to getting AIDS and HIV. And then I go back to Reagan. You guys were not born during Reagan. Reagan was president in the 80s, and I find it remarkable that when you hear a presidential campaign happening today, a lot of people say, we need to get back to those Reagan eras. You know, the Reagan presidency was the strongest president we ever had. And I'm going like, I seem to remember a different president. I remember a president who was president during the beginning of AIDS and had no interest in hearing or seeing or talking about this. And there was no interest because his constituents were not dying of it. It was the blacks, it was the HIV users, it was all the degenerates that we just didn't care about. So it was not on the radar. And people, Grand Fury, were attacking him to get him to say something. Not only him, but they were going after his wife too. Please do something. Please say something. Deaf ears. And so people were dying from no acknowledgement at all. Now, I'm not saying Reagan didn't do great stuff, because he did. What I'm thinking about is what he didn't do and the people it affected. So it's hard for me to be able to say, oh my God, he was the best president we ever had. I lived through that. And it was very hard to be able to say that. So, and I've got to hurry because I'm running out of time. Grand Fury, again, needing money to support the initiative. This is now, so people are getting a little bit, ad agencies are beginning a little bit more aggressive with advertising. And you're going to look at a campaign from a sweater company called Benetton, United Colors of Benetton. If you ever get to a job where you can afford one of their sweaters, you're making a lot of money. I mean, their sweaters are so incredibly expensive. But in the 80s, late 80s, what they did was they did this hair-raising campaign of taking complete opposites and taboo imagery and creating this campaign of love. And regardless of the political situation, regardless of the sexual or the religious implications, regardless of the religious implications, we wanted to love each other. I'm sorry for the poor quality of this, but this is another one of their ads where, and these ads are in London, and if you in the London subway system, their ads are like 20 feet by 10 feet. I mean, they're huge. And so they're taking ad space and they're showing three hearts. White heart, a black heart, and a Asian heart, and saying they're all the same color. Benetton pushes cultural ideas even further, talking about low birth rate, the death penalty, hunger, world hunger, and HIV, all while selling expensive sweaters. Calvin Klein. Calvin Klein was notorious for coining a part of advertising that, I don't know if you'll really believe this, but you know the idea of taking heroin in your arm or sniffing heroin. He coined the phrase heroin chic and made it fashionable, in fashion. He took, this is Kate Moss, who was emaciated, looked like she had been on drugs, and made her into a heroin chic model. And therefore created this whole campaign that became part of this wave of heroin chic and fashion and murder and mayhem and drug abuse and partying and, you know, just being in the dredges and still being fashionable. This is right out of Vogue magazine. More Calvin Klein ads, again, you know, that whole idea of emaciation, of overdoing it, looking like you haven't eaten in several weeks, being hung over from partying too much, to doing lines of a slip. And implying, yeah, it's cool to be heroin chic, part of Madison Avenue. Part of that, then, during that time, was Ralph Lauren. Some of you wear him, but in the early 80s, was to really appreciate this as propaganda, because there was never, you could look at all the Ralph Lauren ads from the 80s, never find a black person in his world. His world was always white, rich, polo playing people, you know, and it wasn't until a black model by the name of Tyson came into his advertising world and began to even out the playing field. Totally different form of propaganda here. All right, so I'm doing really good on time. Sort of, actually, I've got 3 minutes. Your homework is to come up with a propaganda topic that you believe in. And it doesn't have to be safe. Now, I want to make sure that you don't do a PSA, public service announcement. What I mean by that is brush your teeth every day for good hygiene. That's a PSA. Everybody agrees with that, okay? Don't smoke, it's bad for you, you could die of cancer. That's a public service announcement. It's for everybody's good, okay? That's not propaganda. I want something that's controversial, something that you believe in. And it doesn't really matter what it is so long as you believe in it. You're welcome to post this idea on Facebook and say, I'm thinking about doing, does this, you know, sound okay? Be more than happy to respond to it. I'm not going to say, oh, well, that's, you know, I don't think that should be, you know, unless it's really something that shouldn't. But I want you to think about, and you can do that the minute you open up your Facebook, you're inundated with propaganda. Do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? And it doesn't necessarily have to be something that you don't agree with. It could be something that you're totally against. That too can be propaganda. Okay, what I don't want to hear is, I'm apolitical, I don't care about anything. That's when I get really pissed off. Like, I don't want to hear that. Go find something to believe in. Okay? I want it written in one paragraph in Canvas as a proposal for what you're going to do. You're going to do research on it, visual research. So it has to be something that you're willing to sink your heart, your mind, your head, and your ideas into. Okay? Question. Is that clear?